Well, hello everybody, and welcome to another live stream of Q&As for the next 60 minutes, 1 hour. Lots of people already here in the chat, so that's great. Remember, if you've got any comments, leave those. Any questions, leave those. There's a couple that have already come in, and I'll start addressing those. So thanks very much to everybody who's joining live. If you're watching this after the event, and huge amounts of people, actually, loads and loads of people watch it afterwards. Remember, you can watch the whole thing. You can jump forward and look at the various questions. And of course, hopefully you'll join us for another live stream. So as usual, I've seen some of the comments coming through. I'm also going to use my iPad quite a lot because, as I mentioned, I think before those of you who've joined before, the questions that come up on the system sometimes don't catch all of the questions on here. So I will keep checking on both and I'll try and bring those up. So lots and lots of people here and really appreciate it. So let's get stuck in straight away to the various questions, and I'll go back because there's actually a couple of questions have come in, and I'll try and do those that were there. People waiting, and then of course more people will join, and I'm sure they'll throw in many more questions. First of all, I'm going to give a shout out to Elizabeth. Elizabeth has been watching the channel for a couple of months, and she's joined as a channel member. So thanks very much, Elizabeth. I'm not sure if this is your first live stream, but certainly if it is, welcome. So let's get stuck into the questions straight away. So the Hangman has a question on, it took me a while to figure out what B&B was, but I guess it's back-to-backs rather than business-to-business. So the question is, what are the views on back-to-backs? Any suggestions on booking back-to-backs? Now, I think if I'm right in saying you're based in the US, one of the things we're not 100% sure about is what the CDC final rules will be on back-to-back. So as you probably know, the CDC framework for conditional sailing has put limits of 7 nights for all cruises that come in and out of US waters or call on US ports. And we haven't yet heard what the situation is for back-to-backs, because obviously if you want to do a longer cruise, you'll book a back-to-back, 2 7 nights and make it 40 nights. One of the early suggestions, which again I'm saying is a suggestion, it's not confirmed, but some of the early discussions were that they may require everybody to get off the ship. So you might have to actually check out, go back into the check-in area, go through the whole process again with all the testing, whatever that involves, to get back on the ship. So that's not 100% confirmed. Until we see the final technical specs, we won't know that. So one of the watch-outs I would say is, you might want to wait, if you're certainly doing it before November, if you're talking about before November, then you might just want to wait till the CDC's define all of their final regulations around it, because obviously one of the advantages of being back-to-back is you check into your cabin, you're there, you're unpacked, and on the second embarkation day, you often don't have to do the muster drill and all that kind of stuff. So that might be a bit of a hassle. So wait for that. Certainly if you're traveling outside of the US, there is no restrictions on back-to-back. So that's the only real watch out. Now, I've done a couple of back-to-backs, and I don't have any really specific tips. The only key I would have is actually a logistical one. So when you're booking a back-to-back, try and make the decision at the time that you book it. So your bookings are either done as one booking, that's one number, or in the system they have connected the two. So the problems I've had before with back-to-backs is those two bookings haven't been seamless. So we've often had issues where we had to go through a whole process again of handing in your credit card again, getting a key card that works. They're hassling you and giving you all the stickers and the luggage tags to check out. So that's the only thing I would see is, double check before you, on the actual logistical side, that they have actually, been connected. So the next question I had was a great one around prices. Here we go. The JM129 asking another challenging question. So thanks for that. The JM asked quite a few challenging questions, which is always great on the live stream. So the question that the JM129 has is, what is your view on the timing of potential cruise price increases relative to the resumption of cruising, with supply perhaps starting slowly and ramping up? How does this factor in? So it's a very timely question on pricing, because the issue of pricing has been addressed during the course of this week, because both Royal Caribbean and Norwegian had what they call earnings call around their various results. And of course, they lost huge amounts of money, but both of them addressed the issue of pricing. And what they said they're seeing with pricing is, first of all, they're seeing quite a few bookings at the end of this year and into 2022. So as we've spoken before, most people have figured out that if you really want any certainty on cruising, you probably should book the last quarter and into 2022. And what they're saying is they have got pricing up for both those periods to around 2019 levels. So they're holding pricing at around 2019 levels, so pre-pandemic pricing. I think probably we've seen pricing in 2020 they thought was going to be going up. And what they've said, the reason for that is that kind of growth in demand they're getting. And they both commented that actually they've seen most of the demand coming from people over 65 as we went into this year, because of the people that were early on in the vaccine. So what they're saying is pricing is holding around 2019 levels. Now, what we are seeing, though, which I would say, linked to your point, is there are still a lot of deals around. So I don't know if many of you get many of the emails, sign up, but you'll find a constant flow of deals. And what those deals are doing is they're bundling things in. So you're getting Wi-Fi, drinks, gratuities, maybe some extra onboard credit, or they're actually giving upgrade, from balcony to, from inside to balcony or whatever. So I think what we're seeing happening is they're trying to hold the headline rate of the fare. And I think that's what I read earlier on, where they were talking about at some point managing the reintroduction of ships to try and match demand and supply to keep pricing up. One of the things that they really suffered with enormously in 2008, 2009, in the financial crisis, is they went into quite deep discounting, because of course all the ships were out there, they still had lots of capacity and people weren't traveling as much, and they started discounting. And I know a lot of people that I have met in the industry saying that was a terrible time for them, because they weren't getting very good pricing. They started getting loyal customers not that happy, because the wrong type of people, people who were looking for a different cruise experience, were going on cruises because of price rather than the right cruise line. So they've always said they want to try and avoid that. So it's a kind of complicated way of saying what the cruise lines, which I think you were implying anyway, is they're going to be trying to manage supply and demand much more cleverly. So what all the cruise lines have said, which I think comes back to your point, is they're going to have to logistically phase cruise coming back in. So Carnival Corporation, Arnold Donald, said they're hoping that by early 2022 that all their ships will be back, based on when they can start in the US especially. We've seen both Norwegian and Royal Caribbean saying the same thing. Point that they were making, which Norwegian was making, is going to take up to, I think it was 90 days, so 12 weeks as well, what we've heard before, from the time they decide to bring or get the okay to bring a ship in to bring it back. Logistically, they're going to stagger ships coming back. So I think you're right. What they're going to do is they're going to be managing both, from a cost perspective, a supplier's perspective, supply and demand, to try and hold pricing. So I think as we're looking forward, assume that pricing is going to be more or less what it is, but look for those deals, look for the bundling in stuff, look for the upgrades, look for those kind of things. And that's what I think is going to happen now. What we will have to wait for is 2022 and see what overall demand is, because I still think that demand is likely to be lower than it was going to be, just because, a lot of people won't want to go cruising because they're worried about cruising as it heads back, and all that kind of stuff. So certainly I think that's something to watch. I think getting really deep gouge deals, less so, but bundling deals, I think is going to be the big opportunity. I then want to come on to Francis. Francis is having tea. So today, water, I've actually got some tea. So I'm joining you on the tea front today. Lots of regular faces, Hetty there, KB here, which is great. I'm going to try and find the question around solo traveling. Maybe I'll just read the question. I remember the question. So I can't find the question. But Francis had asked a question. I saw it on my iPad here around solo traveling. And what did I think was going to be the case? So anyway, I remember the question, so I won't pull it up. But basically what she was asking was, what do I think is going to happen with solo travelers as we head and as things restart up? One of the challenges, I think, for solo traveling is going to be the protocols, because the protocols are likely to stay as they are moving forwards. I think we're not going to see lifting of the protocols, because as we know, what we've been told is vaccines are critical in terms of stopping us getting ill, stopping us getting hospitalized, stopping us getting dying, which is a nice thing to stop. But There's not good data on transmission, etc. So what they're saying is a lot of those protocols are going to be kept: the mask wearing, social distancing, reduced capacity. And one of those protocols is around only being able to do things like dine with people in your own travel party. Now, it's very interesting. For example, I have, as most of you know, a lot of the cruises that I go on, I do travel solo because my partner is working full time, doesn't have as much time off. So I do a lot of solo traveling. But I've noticed on a couple of those, they have specifically made the point that for the main dining room allocation, it's going to be a table for two, i.e. just for me, which is fine because often I'm sort of working and stuff. So that could be the big challenge, because obviously as a solo traveler, one often wants to meet people and stuff. So one of the things I would certainly watch out for and look at very carefully is what those protocols are, because I think as a solo traveler, people want to meet people, and I'm sure the meets and greets going on, the excursions, but the dining thing could be a question mark, and we haven't seen a good answer on that one. So that's one thing I would watch out for. On a pricing front, I think it's going to be a similar thing. I haven't seen a lot of solo deals for the resumption. However, I think we'll see that closer to the time, but I haven't seen a lot of solo. Certainly all the ones that I had booked, which was sort of before or rescheduled, they're all the usual percentage kind of supplements and things like that. So that's still an issue. Chris is asking, and I've got a horrible feeling, Chris, that you've sent me a question on Facebook or something, or online, which I haven't answered yet. So I apologize for that if that is the case. Really important one about insurance. So thoughts on insurance for long cruises, 150 days, so the World Cruise Plus. Cruise lines say you need to be fully insured, but getting insurance is very difficult. I'm not a big insurance expert. However, the only experience I've got is when I did not 150 days, but we did, I think it was around 8 or 9 weeks, which was part of the Queen Victoria and Queen Elizabeth World Cruises. We did those sort of back to back. And you're right, if you've got an annual policy, depending on the country, certainly here in the UK, you can't go for any trip that's consecutively 30 days. You have to get specific travel insurance. Now, actually, my big travel insurer was very happy to offer a package. It was quite expensive, though. So I don't have a lot of advice on that specifically because I haven't tried to get that. However, what I would say is there is I'm not sure if you're based in the US or the UK, but there is a site which I know Cruise Radio, Doug Parker, works with quite a lot, which I think is called Insure My Trip. And they have a lot of advice around cruising because they focus a lot on cruising. So if you're based certainly in the US, I would take a look at that Insure My Trip, because I think you'll get a lot of direction there, because I think they're a kind of a comparison site. So I haven't quite answered your question, but I will certainly keep an eye out for that whole, the whole thing around insurance, because it's going to become a really key issue as we move forward. Certainly what we've seen increasingly is, the good news is a lot of travel policies are now including COVID-related insurance as well, but the long trips I haven't seen yet. So let me see if I've missed any other questions there. I'm going to pick up, because it's always good to talk about the resumption thing. So let me scroll back here and see if I can find the question that Sarah has asked around. It's very, I apologize, I keep doing this both ways, but on my iPad, as I watch it the same as you do, I get all of the messages, but the actual software only screens out what the top one, so they screen a lot of people out. So that's a little bit frustrating. So let me just maybe answer the questions. There was a question around resumption of cruising, and there was a question around heading out of Port Canaveral in October. So let me touch on that. Where we are with resumption, I'll talk a little bit about where we are with UK, where we are with Europe and the US. In the US, there is no progress on opening as of yet, and there's no dates as of yet. What the cruise lines have said is they are still waiting for and expecting the CDC to issue the technical specifications for them to be able to run those test cruises. As you probably know, in the US, they're requiring test cruises to test all the protocols and so on before they would let them sail. And they are waiting for those. Now, what they were saying all during this week is they're hoping it's a matter of days. However, there's been no movement. So let's assume that that does come sometime during March. It's going to take them a while to get this up and running, but they are still hopeful that they are going to be able to get some sailing, some ramping up sort of July time, but then they're going to start phasing in ships. So all of the lines are selling cruises on all of their ships. So every single ship that's scheduled to be in the US, in Europe, wherever it's supposed to be, they are selling all of those cruises. But we know that they're not all going to run because they're kind of ramping up. So when people ask the question, which is a valid enough question, is will my X trip in October happen? First of all, we don't know when cruising will resume overall. Secondly, there's no certainty that that specific ship will sail because it may not be brought back in. And thirdly, we don't know whether that itinerary will sail. Now, what the cruise lines are pretty optimistic, though, is once we get into Q4, which I think the question was around October, they are pretty hopeful that many of the ships will be back, many of the itineraries will run. Of course, what the protocols are, whether we will need vaccine certificates or whatever, is still unknown because countries may require those. So it's kind of, I would be pretty optimistic, but a lot of hinges on that phasing. So it's a really difficult, really difficult one to answer. So linked to that, because it then links into the question around the UK. So P. Stockman says, in light of the UK government opening up plan, do you think Cunard may start cruising in June? Will they begin with British R cruises and maybe change some other itineraries? So this is really interesting from a UK perspective, because as you know, for those of you who don't know, the UK government has laid out a framework for kind of return to normality. And some of the key dates, what they're saying is these are the earliest buy dates, so the dates could shift later. But they're saying by the middle of May, I think it's the 15th, it might be the 17th of May, but certainly in the middle of May, by then it's likely that they will international travel will be allowed to reopen. They're hopeful by the middle of June that most, if not all, of the key restrictions will have been lifted. And that's linked into the whole thing with the vaccine rollout and incident cases and all that kind of stuff. Now, what's very important, coming to your point about Cunard, is this week, I think it was on Thursday, both P&O Cruises and Cunard Cruises have taken all the cruises that are scheduled to run until that middle date in June off sale. So they haven't cancelled any cruises. So P&O still hasn't cancelled. They're due to return, would return in April. They haven't cancelled those. They're still holding all those cruises, but you can't buy them anymore. But if you are on one of those cruises, they haven't cancelled. And Cunard the same. Now, if I remember correctly, they're phasing back during the course of May, their ships at various dates during May. So at the moment, those are taken off sale, and why they reassess what the government allows. So do we know if they're going to start sailing in June or not? Possibly. They're hoping to, but we don't know. But I think we will likely see something fairly soon in the next week or two, because the reason I say that is P&O Cruises still scheduled on their system to start up in April, which means because if they've reduced the payment time to 30 days, it will mean that people have to start paying as we head into March, which is next week. So they're going to have to start coming off the fence and actually start doing things. So a lot of that's going to hinge around the decisions that are made. Critical key date is April, middle of April, when the travel task force, of which the CLIA and stuff is making representations to, is going to be making some decisions around travel and what it entails. So we will get a better sense, I think, in the next week or two, and then certainly in the middle of April, we'll get a much better sense of what is going to be allowed. The point that's being made, very importantly, is even if the UK government allows travel to open, it of course requires other people to be taking people. We've also seen the EU have agreed that they're going to be looking at the vaccine passport. They say it's going to take at least 3 months to bring into place, while they look at the technology and all that kind of stuff. But they're talking about that becoming part of the way people can move between the EU or enter the EU. So there's a huge amount of question marks. So I do think it's very likely that we will see cruising probably starting more local, just because that's more likely to be possible. But it's still really uncertain. And I think the degree that's uncertain is why they've taken stuff off sale. There are too many unknowns. So it's a little bit complicated way, but there's those critical dates. Certainly we'll get early indications in March, because they'll have to start cruising, cancelling April. Cunard again only have a 30-day period to pay, so they only have to start cancelling in April, but we'll get that task force back in April. So that's basically the sort of the situation with that there. John is asking this question. So they've cancelled August 2021. I guess that may or may not be an Alaska cruise. They're offering a 10% credit to rebook. If I leave my cash, should I take my money out? Obviously, that's, there's a lot around kind of your personal decision and whether you need the money and whatever. I think what I'm doing, let me tell you what I'm doing, is when I'm getting cruises cancelled or I think are unlikely to run, I'm actually taking those and moving those into next year. And a lot of cases I'm replicating the cruise. So if that's a cruise that you really want to do, that cruise you were doing, if it's an Alaska cruise or whatever it was on a specific ship, what I would be tempted to do, if you don't mind having the money locked up, I would be tempted to just move it, because if that's a cruise that you decided you really, really wanted, then why not just keep that cruise? So actually just shift it by, time shift it. So that's certainly what I'm doing. I've already moved quite a few, or three into next year. I've got something coming up in June, which I think is going to be cancelled. It's on Viking. I want to do it. I'm less fussed about the ship. It's an itinerary I want to do, Venice to Athens. So I'm just going to move that. So I'm actually not getting into the whole thing of should I move it to October, should I move it to November? I'm just literally moving it into next year. And the reason I'm doing that is partly because there's trips that I really want to do, so push it as far out. And then secondly, with a lot of them, it means you have to put a lot more money in because of final balances. But secondly, I think there's too much uncertainty about what cruises are really going to be able to run. As we were saying earlier, what ships are going to be able to run, what itineraries are going to be able to run, what countries will or won't let you in, what the requirements will be. Will you have to have a vaccine passport when you have a vaccine passport? So rather than move into next year, with this year, what I'm saying is, what I will do is I have cruises right through the end of the year, but once ships have started sailing and we know they're absolutely sailing, that's when I might shift stuff into this year. It's a long way of saying, if you can afford if you don't mind the money being locked up, the cruise you really, really want to do, move the whole camboodle. Princess aren't guaranteeing fares though, which is a pity. So ask them around if they'll guarantee fares. So some of the cruise lines, what they're doing is they're actually saying if you move your cruise to a whole year, they will lock in the fare. So I would also ask them, can I move this to a whole year and will you lock in the fare and the deals, the onboard credit or whatever? So that's what I'd be tempted to. Can you hold the deal? That was this point they were talking about on Horizon. Now Horizon, actually, Carnival Horizon is one of the ships that they have designated very early on. So just going back to Jessica's question, is Carnival Horizon is already in the process and is actually the ships that is in that whole process and will do the test cruises. So actually on Horizon, it is probably relatively promising, I would say. Right, so John, they're saying it was an Alaska cruise. I'll just touch on this one again because it's sort of linked to the other one. Nigel saying, hi Gary, good to see you. Thanks for joining. With vaccine being rolled out at speed in the UK, but much lower in EU countries, do you think the chance of round UK this summer will go ahead, and does it depend on staff vaccine? So a couple of key points in there. I think you're right on that. One of the key points that you're making, Nigel, is around the whole vaccine rollout thing. But linked to that is also when EU will open borders for UK people or people out of the UK. And as you know, borders are pretty locked down. There was the UK variant. There's a lot of paranoia around new variants coming in. So a lot of this will hinge around how soon we think Europe will open the borders. And clearly, there could be some kind of link between how much of the population is vaccinated before people are comfortable moving freely. The second thing linked to that is, as I mentioned, the EU this week had their call where they have agreed to very, very actively look at that digital vaccine passport, which will include both testing and vaccine data, which then means you can move into Europe without quarantining, which of course, if you're going on a cruise, is pretty important. But that, they're saying, is not going to be ready until sometime in summer. They're saying it's going to take at least 3 months to work that all through. And there's still a bit of toing and froing and arguing about that. But they're going to focus initially on EU people moving within the EU, and then eventually for third countries. Of course, the UK is a third country. It's not part of the EU. So certainly, I think as we head into summer, the ability to go places could be fairly limited. So I'm of the view that cruise lines will be looking at round UK trips, and a lot of them already have some of those. We just saw Riviera Travel, for example, they just launched a whole bunch of round UK cruises, ocean cruises, which they're hoping to start running in July, etc. So I think that is definitely what we're happy to see. If I was looking at my little glass ball, and I want to talk on your other point, Nigel, about the staff and vaccines. Now, what we don't know is finally what's going to happen with vaccine requirements. So what we know is Saga have said that they're going to focus, they're going to require passengers to be vaccinated, but the crew not, because they just can't get done in time that they were hoping to sail. Although they're going to push theirs back now, they're relooking the dates. We've seen both Norwegian and Royal Caribbean say the crew will be vaccinated, and so they are going to do it when crew are vaccinated. So we don't entirely know what's going to happen. I think a lot of it will happen around what both the cruise lines decide how quickly they can get their crew vaccinated in those countries, Philippines, Indonesia, etc. And also if there are any regulations or rules by countries. One of the big challenges, I think, is going to be, is everyone's focusing on what the cruise lines, will the cruise lines require me to be vaccinated? What we should be focusing on is less what the cruise lines want and more what the countries will want. So for example, if the EU says no one can come into the country without a digital vaccine passport, which you can either show a negative PCR test or whatever they define, or that you've been vaccinated, that will determine what will or won't run. That will also presumably determine whether the crew have to be vaccinated, because presumably the crew will have to have the same documentation. So a lot of unanswerables. My sense is everyone's pretty much agreed that's going to be required. So I think that's that. I think a lot will hinge around that. Let me touch on the point about what Erica's asking around the Norway cruise from Southampton. How will COVID testing mid-cruise before returning back to the UK work? Same question with the Caribbean cruise. How will we be tested before returning home? So there's two slightly different things in there, but I did want to touch on those. But first of all, we'll have another slurp of tea. Lovely. So testing on ships. Now, what's really important to note with what the protocols require and what countries require is cruise lines have all been required in one form or another to have testing capability on board their ships. So the CDC process in the US for any ships in and out there has specifically built a whole requirement in their statement around building testing capacity on board ships. Viking have actually in the process of installing pretty advanced testing processes. And actually Viking are talking about testing people almost every day as part of their protocols, and certainly with the systems they have. Whether they do that, we don't know. What MSC Cruises have been doing is they have been doing mid-cruise testing, which we may be referring to, and also in some cases testing before you get off. The CDC rules specifically are requiring tests before you board the ship at the dock, and you also have to be tested before you get off the ship. Now, one of the viewers of the channel had asked a question on that. I wasn't 100% sure, but anyway, checking with Viking, in fact, they got a letter from Viking. Viking's goal will be, as with MSC currently sailing and all other cruise lines, if you require a test to either enter the country, return back into the country, or you're going to need it to basically return home. They're building that process of testing in. So I think you'll find that's done. Certainly, talking to people who've been on both the MSC cruises running at the moment, also some people on the Quantum of the Sea cruises out of Singapore, it's been pretty straightforward because I guess they just schedule those tests that during the course of the cruise. Certainly with the one to Norway, if you're heading out of Southampton, you actually have a sea day both to get to Norway and you have a sea day getting back, so they have plenty of time to run tests and do tests. So I think that's pretty clear. The Caribbean, it's a CDC requirement, so there is testing capability on board, and certainly MSC and Royal with Quantum Sea have shown it's a pretty simple system to work. And talking to people who've been on those, they found it very easy, no hassles, and it's all been managed pretty well. So let me touch again on this whole thing with the US, because I think it's really important to Greg and Dobbs. We enjoy your site, brilliant knowledge of the industry, great. We're on Celebrity Summit on the 25th of July out of Cape Liberty to Bermuda. Cape Liberty, is that New York or New Jersey? And excuse me for not knowing which port that is. To Bermuda. Any thoughts on chances of sailing? Thank you. So I just want to recap what I had what I'd said on that, because I know people come in and out of the things. So sorry for Greg and Debs. So basically what's happening is, I would say July is still pretty uncertain, because we're still waiting for the test cruises to run, the technical specs. It takes at least 60 days after the technical specs before they're going to get a license to sail. So to be sailing in July, June, May, they'd have to be doing test cruises, sort of March, April time. So it's possible but uncertain, but it depends a lot on how long the CDC get those technical specifications out so test cruises can run. Now, what I don't know offhand is, you talk about Celebrity Summit, so you're probably okay. So Celebrity have many of their ships already in the CDC system. So what I would suggest you do is, and I'll try and put a link somewhere, it's in previous videos, is to go through the process. You also have to get your ship back into US waters and into the first stage of the CDC process, which is all to do with crew. And every week they publish the status of ships in that system. Now, the last time I looked, there were 65 ships, and I can't remember if Celebrity Summit was in there, but there is a listing we can look at. And what I'll do at the end of this, I'll put the link into the show notes of this live stream, where you can go and check if your ship is already, if the Summit is already in that process, because that's a key sign. The other thing I would do is, there's a great site which is free. It's a free app which is called Marine Traffic. So it's worth downloading that and looking where Celebrity Summit is. If Celebrity Summit is way across in Asia, but you might want to just check, in a month or two's time, where is that ship? Has it been, is it headed back to the US, and is it getting into the process? Because we don't yet know what Celebrity's plan is for scaling up and recrewing. So those are the two things I would watch. July is possible. I think the ports are feeling more optimistic that July could be the early starting, but all ships are not going to come back. So Celebrity won't have them all sailing. So keeping an eye on where your ship is it already in the system, and see where in the world it is, because there's some ships that are theoretically sailing quite soon in the Caribbean, but they're actually still across in the Philippines or something like that. So, and it's going to take 6 weeks to get back. So that's looking a little bit odd. So Steve F, everyone else is cancelling Alaska. Why is the Norwegian Encore still scheduled? Are they possibly reflagging it to their NCL American division? Well, a couple of things on which is really important to note. First of all, Norwegian Encore is currently sailing towards the Philippines. It has Norwegian Encore, which was based in around about the UK. They used the Norwegian Encore to pick up crew that they'd sent back to Europe, which are in the UK, other parts of Europe. They'd sent, I think, roughly about 1,000 crew. They'd sent everyone crew back to reman ships. The thought cruising was going to start much sooner than it did. They realized that it isn't. They identified 2 ships. So Norwegian Joy was going to take all the crew back who are based in the Caribbean area. They collected all the crew together on Norwegian Joy, but they just this week changed their mind about sailing the Norwegian Joy back to Asia, and they're actually now going to charter aircraft to take those back. However, Norwegian Encore now has been sailing for a week. They left a week ago. A week was past Wednesday. They left the UK. They sailed to somewhere in Europe. They picked up crew, and they're now sailing away. So that's going to take them until April or so to get to the Philippines. And then assuming that they come straight back, that's going to take them another 6 weeks. So for a start, the ship is not going to be around for that season, potentially anyway. But more importantly is what most of the lines, so that's one issue about that ship specifically. Will it even be back in time, or when will it be back? The second point is what the lines are saying is most of them have cancelled any cruise in Alaska, or many of them, not most, many of them have started cancelling any Alaska cruise that is in a Canadian port. So if you've got a cruise like, so Holland America, Seabourn, Princess, cancelled all their cruises that started, say, in Vancouver. They've kept their ones currently sailing out of Seattle. So I'm not sure with the Norwegian Encore which embarkation point was. So they kind of hoping that some arrangement can be made. So there's a lot of lobbying of the Canadian government to try and get them to agree to allow technical stops where the ships can sail, no passengers embark, but they tick the box for the US Passenger Vessel Service Act. I think I went the right way around this time. Is that going to happen? It seems unlikely. The second thing is there's also lobbying to try and get the US government to lift or have an exception to allow it. Again, people think that's not very likely. The Canadian, there was a transport committee which is in Congress. They wrote a letter to the Canadian ambassador asking for help, which doesn't seem very high profile to me. I would have thought it's either going to be the state, I don't know what, the US State Department or whatever, the president. It seems more likely if you're going to get a waiver. So I think you find that they're just waiting to see if anything's going to come of that. And also, I think, making plans around what they're going to do with the ship. Now, what some of the lines are doing, like Holland America, they're basically saying to people, we will move your whole trip a whole year out without you doing anything. And then do that, they're going to tackle what they're going to do next. So I think it's such a complicated process that it's taking time. But Norwegian Encore very specifically. In terms of you asking around the Norwegian Cruise Line America division, no, would be my. It's pretty much impossible to do, because in order to circumvent the Passenger Vessel Service Act, ships have to be built in the US. They have to be owned by US operated, US registered company, which then falls under US law, and also the ship has to be flagged there. And the only exception which was ever given was for Pride of America. And Pride of America is slightly unusual because it was half built in the US before it went bust, and took it, and it was actually finished in Europe eventually. So it's kind of an exception. So they will find it impossible to that last point. So let's see. So Russ, I think, is picking up. I just want to pick up on that point. I booked ages ago on Queen Mary to New York return with a week in Norway. Cunard tells me it's on hold, but we'll sell all 3 legs individually. It's tens of thousands of dollars more price that way. So Russ, if Cunard have taken all trips for June off sale at the moment, so if your cruise, if this is all before June, then it's all on hold and no one can book it. So I'm not sure about the 3 legs individually. If it's after June, that may be the case. Now, it may be something to do with the CDC rules with cruises going to be 7 days, but I would just keep an eye on that because they put stuff on hold, sales on hold at the moment. So that seems a little bit odd, unless those legs themselves are past June. So if those other legs are past June, they probably are still on sale, but maybe the entire as one isn't. So I think you're just going to have to wait. Keith asking one of those interviews, how long before you think Royal Caribbean will join the other cruise lines and cancel? I don't know. It's very interesting. Royal Caribbean blog, they did a whole analysis where they were trying to work out if there's a pattern between when Royal Caribbean cancels, and they looked at all the cancellations to try and work out what was the system, what was the model, and they came up with no answer to that, because they were asking the same question: why hasn't Royal Caribbean group cancelled yet? I think what they worked out is it's all linked. The latest it's linked to is final payment date. So for May cruises, I think they're currently on 60 days now. So May, April, May. So the latest they would cancel is within the next 10 days, I would say. So I think it's pretty soon they will be canceling within the next week or two. It seems the most likely one of all. Here's a question around finances. How does Royal lose 5.6 billion and still be able to operate? They are. It's very interesting because if you look at all of the financial statements, all the stuff that's going on, one of the things that's very, very clear is the cruise lines have found it relatively expensive but pretty easy to raise funds, because institutions and lenders definitely see a long-term future in cruising, and they see a way of making their money back. So answering your question, it's because the financial institutions believe that ultimately the cruising will bounce back and prove to be a good medium and long-term investment. I think they're probably right. Cruising, it's hard to see cruising. It might stumble and take a while to get going, but I agree with you. It's pretty mind-boggling when you look at, the cruise lines combined are burning through $1 billion a month. It is staggering how much money they're burning through. And then when they go through the financial things, they are relatively, I'm sure they're not practiced, but they are relatively relaxed. So it's literally, they are able to just keep getting more money. Now, Carnival have just issued, I can't remember the number, but they've raised about another $1 billion by issuing more shares. So they've issued more shares to raise more money, because obviously what companies have is they have a certain amount of shares, but they're not all issued. So those, but definitely financial institutions and so on absolutely are very, very comfortable. Oh, very nice. Mark saying Walter's World, which I know many of you are familiar with his channel, is always very supportive of the stuff I did give a shout this morning on his live stream. Hopefully I have got some new subscribers. I'll go and I'll definitely go and check that out. So let's have a look and make sure that I've not missed questions. So I'm going to go back, because often what happens is we go and we miss those. Gavin and Luke just agreeing. Gavin and Luke, holidays at sea, have a great YouTube channel, particularly if you are interested. I think I said live, if you are interested, particularly in the UK cruise, they have much more content around those than I do. So they're definitely worth checking out their site. So we'll see UK only cruises when they return, and I think that's pretty likely. Right, so I'm going back and trying to catch up the cruise of questions I missed. So I apologize if I've missed your questions so far. So AJ's love for life. 2 different questions. Are there any ships that still allow balcony cigarette smoking? And 2, am I allowed to purchase liquor, wine, or beer in the ship store, take it to my room and consume it? You know what's great? One of the things why I've just is love for life and the questions. One of the things that's very exciting from my perspective, and I don't know if people like Gavin and Luke are seeing the same thing, is, for the last year, people watching travel content or reading travel content has kind of evaporated. And so a lot of it ends up being discussions, which we're all interested in, around updates, what's going on, is this happening, isn't that happening, how can I move it, how can I get my refund, and so on and so forth. But it's been very interesting. In the last, I would say, week to 2 weeks, maybe a little bit longer, I can see, looking at the data, that people are starting to look at like the real questions, like the cruising questions. And I'll come back to your question in a second, like smoking on balcony, packing tips, choosing cabins, which is very exciting, because it suggests that there is this beginning groundswell as people are really seeing, as I guess we were sort of the whole vaccine process, and we're seeing like light at the end of the tunnel. We're starting to see that we're going to have to stop worrying about getting our money back, stop worrying about our cruise being cancelled, stop worrying about what we're packing and smoking. So let me come back to AJ's love. So can you smoke on balconies, and can you buy liquor? Now, in terms of smoking on balconies, I'm not 100% sure. But based on all the cruises that I've been on, the ones that I've looked at, the only one that I have come across in recent times are the German lines, like Hapag Lloyd, for example, which still allowed smoking on balconies. Pretty much all of the major lines or all the major cruise groups do not allow smoking on balconies. So if you look at all the Carnival group, the Royal Caribbean group lines, and Norwegian group lines, no. But some of the more German lines. Now, I'm not 100% sure, so I will need to check this, if things like MSC in Europe and Costa in Europe do. But the answer pretty much is no. And unless you, I guess Germans like smoking a lot, so, and they've managed to not move on that. So the answer to that is pretty much no, you will really struggle. Now, I did see at some point on Cruise Critic, did have an article around smoking. So they may have a more definitive line-by-line review, but smoking on balconies is not possible. People that I know who smoke do one of 2 things. One of which, they go and hang out in those little corners that they're allowed to up on deck, and that little clique forms, and they become like real close buddies. A couple of the ships do have areas where you can smoke, so a lot of them still allow smoking in the casinos, which is, in my view, a pity in some ways. But a lot of them still allow smoking are in casinos, even though they are talking about moving that away, or some of them have certain nights where you can smoke in the casino. And some of them have little smoking rooms. So, for example, Princess, if you're a fan of Princess, they have the Churchill room where you can go and smoke. Again, like Hapag Lloyd has a whole bar where you can smoke in. Like, it's a massive, big bar. Azamara has a little smoking room. Cunard has a little smoking room that's mostly for cigars, but pretty much no. So the second question you have about booze, no, you can't buy drinks. Was it just booze you were asking? We were going wild. Booze, wine, and beer. So no, you can't. If you buy it in the shop, they will normally hold it to the end of the cruise. You can't take it. And often on pretty much every single cruise line, if you buy stuff off the ship, so you go on an excursion, you might go to a tequila factory or a vineyard or something. In most cases, they will take that off you and hold it until the end of the cruise. Now, you are, though, allowed when you embark, every cruise line has a certain allowance where you can take a certain amount of wine or beer on board. And it differs line by line by line, but normally each passenger can take it. So what most people who do want to have a little tipple in their room, that's what they will do. So that's one way of doing it. The second way of doing it is some of the more premium cruise lines include, of course, drinks within the fare. So if you travel, for example, Queen's Grill in Cunard, you get a choice of liquor. You get a choice of big whacking great big liter bottles where you can choose those. Obviously, other lines will include drinks in the mini bar and stuff like that. So that's another way that people actually get around that. So probably not the answer that you're asking. Now, Robert's asking. Robert, I'm not sure if you're in the UK. If you're in the UK, there is. I can answer this question from the UK perspective because I do have to get pre-existing insurance because I had chemo I've just gone through my 9th anniversary of being in remission, which is very exciting. Aiming for my 10 next year. So I have to get pre-existing insurance. And I use a company which is called It's So Easy Insurance. They do pre-insurance and I've been very happy with them. You do some medical screening questions, which you have to do every year when you renew it. I get annual insurance from them. So It's So Easy is definitely one to look at. And I think I'm also around saying Avanti because I've done some insurance for my mother. So Avanti. So if you're UK based, those are the two that I know. And there's also another one which is called Clear something. Now I'm trying to remember what it's called. Someone might remember, be able to type it, but there is another one. If you put Clear, it's a Clear Shore. I think it might be called Clear Shore. They do pre-existing insurance, but take a look at that if you're in the UK. Certainly I find It's So Easy, really, really good coverage and very good on the pre-existing side. So if anyone has any other tips, particularly if you're in the US and have tips. Eileen, cute dog. A friend of mine told me that Cunard has single rooms that cost less than the price of 2 travelers. I've not been able to find any of those rooms, and do other cruise lines have this? So yes, Eileen, they do have solo cabins. They didn't originally, they retrofitted them in because they do get a lot of solo travelers. And you're quite right, the price, if you're traveling in, say, Queen's Grill or Princess Grill, the 2 higher grades, it's 100% surcharge, so you basically charge it for 2 people. In Britannia, you can get that surcharge down. So they do have solar cabins. They are extremely popular and they sell out really, really quickly. And they don't, because they don't have that many of them, but they absolutely do have those. And I know people who've cruised on them and they really like them. And there's a couple of videos. Chris Frame, for example, he's an Australian guy. He has a channel which is, if you just search Chris Frame, and I think his channel's actually called Cunard Chris, but if you search Chris Frame, it'll come up. He's actually got a video of solar cabins, and Chris does a lot of talks on Cunard. He talks about maritime history and so on. So he's got a great YouTube channel, very interesting, and he's got some stuff on the solar cabins, so you can have a look at those. Do other cruise lines have it? Yes, they do, increasingly so. If you look at something like Norwegian Cruise Line, they have a whole solo cabin area, but they're all inside cabins, and they are quite small cabins, to be honest. So that may not be everyone's taste. Saga Cruises, for those people based out of the UK, 20% of their cabins on their ships, their 2 ships they have, are solo cabins. If you look at the big lines like Royal Caribbean, they're starting to have some of them on their bigger ships. Princess has none, for example. You've got Holland America on some of their newer ships too. So pretty much all of them do have them as well. But Cunard ones are pretty. Oops, sorry, my glasses around. Cunard are great to look at now. I've got a couple of videos around solo cruising, and one of the things I will update the video, because I've had a few people ask that, is around the best cruise line for solo travelers. But if you search much, tips for travelers channel, solo cruising, there is 1 or 2 videos which are going to add a little bit more detail, but updated with much more information on those. So Shari is asking, does every line require 90 days for restart, or is there a possibility to start up sooner than that? Why does it take so long? So the reason it's taking so long is, so the answer to the first question is no, but, so let me explain it. So the reason it takes so long is ships are basically either in cold layup at the moment or sort of warm layup. So warm layup is where they have about 130, 140 crew, depending on the size of the ship, to basically keep it ticking over, the engines and stuff like that, ticking over. But they then need to bring back, 600, 700, 800, 1,000 crew to then get it back. There's also quite a few things they have to do in terms of resetting the rooms, getting everything up and running again. There's the whole supply chain, where they then have to, of course, restock all the bars, all the food, all that kind of stuff. So it's a pretty long process. The other thing is the ships are currently dotted all around the world. So although people have started to move a lot of their ships, say, back to the US if they're due to start in the US, or they're in Europe. But what we're about to go through, of course, is the period of change. So normally around March, April time is when the ships that have been sailing in the Caribbean, many of them move to Europe. Around October time, they kind of move back. So the ships are kind of all over the place. So it's just a very long, complicated process, because they have to, obviously recruit all the crew, bring the crew back on contracts. They have to make sure they've got all their paperwork. They have to bring them back. So it's just a very long, complicated process in terms of getting up and running. So the reason it will take less for some ships is what the cruise lines have done in some cases, mostly in the US, or probably exclusively in the US, is as they've gone into the process to start building up for test cruises, some of them are fully crewed ships. And I think going back to discussion we were having earlier, I seem to remember Carnival Horizon was one of those. So they've got the ships kind of sort of more manned up, so they can switch them on quicker. They can turn them around in 4, 5, 6 weeks and get running. So it's up to 90 days. So Norwegian Cruise Line is saying it's 90 days. The Carnival Corporation have said for their ships that are like the P&O, the Cunard ships, the Princess ships that are all hanging around the UK, that's going to take 12 weeks to do. So it's quite a slow process, just because the pure logistics. These things have been emptied out. So things don't deteriorate. Some cabins have been reset and all sorts of stuff. So it's just a huge, complicated process. So that's really why. So I want to just check I'm not missing anything here as I go backwards, because I feel bad when I go back and look afterwards and I realize there's people who've asked questions and I've left things out. So we've asked about restarts. I think I've answered that. Looking to book Academy because I've probably been in November this year, traveling in the UK. Okay. So Maggie's asking, I'll just read it from here rather than bringing that. So Maggie R is looking to book a Caribbean cruise for my 40th birthday in November this year, traveling from the UK. Do you think it's a good idea? Should be fully vaccinated by then? Well, the cruise lines are relatively optimistic that by Q4 things will be more back to normal. They will have more of their ships back. Is it a risk? Absolutely, because we just do not know yet whether the borders will be open between the US. Will you be able to fly from the UK to the US? One feels like it's possible, but it depends again what the regulations are. Will it be allowed to go without quarantining? Will there be a quarantining allowed? Will there be a vaccine passport? Now, clearly, the US is moving pretty fast. The UK is moving pretty fast on vaccines. I think there's a real sense that by November, things should be possible to be moving. So that's the whole area. Another big risk, of course, is, as we saw, borders will get closed very quickly if these new variants arise, and particularly new variants which are not, the vaccines don't protect from. So there's a lot of jitteriness around those. And I've seen both, for example, in the UK, we had Boris Johnson saying the biggest risk to their opening up plan is new variants. And I saw in an interview with Richard Fain, he runs the Royal Caribbean group, saying he sees the biggest risk to cruising over the rest of this year and into next year, new variants basically throwing everything out. So certainly, will ships be back? So did you say Carnival? You didn't say Carnival specifically. But if you take a look, which are big, they're still planning to phase ships in. So Carnival aren't saying all they'll be back by November. So there's a ship that's not back. So it's a big risk. I think the advantage you've got if you're booking it is you know, go for something, I would suggest, that has a very low deposit. So if you take a look at Princess, for example, Princess Cruises, they're running promotions, which I think is still going, where you pay a £50 deposit. So it's a very, very small deposit. And I can't remember the exact, you know, you're only going to have to pay for a November cruise. You're probably going to have to be paying around about September time, the final balance. So there's a lot of time that you've got. So I would choose a cruise line that, you know, you have low deposits, so you're not tying up too much money. You keep yourself pretty flexible, understand that it's going to be a very flexible situation, but you've then got something to look at. You may find that looking on November, I guess you want to go somewhere warm. We're going to say looking closer to home might be easy. I'm just saying that I was right. That port was New Jersey, so I was right with that. So that's good. So let's see. I know I saw some questions there around MSC cruises. So let me see if I can bring those up. I've booked a cruise on MSC, paid full price. So let me see if I can find that one, because I've seen a couple of questions around MSC. So let's see what people are asking on MSC. My wife and I ordered a cruise in Orchestra MSC. Oh, the Orchestra, MSC Orchestra, okay. July 2021 out of Venice. We paid full price for this cruise. You think this is going to come down? How does MSC hold during the Corona cruise of 2021? Okay. So basically, as you probably know, MSC Cruises were one of the very first cruise lines to sail and are still, they've just resumed again with MSC Grandiosa. They've got lots of protocols. They've learned a lot about the process, and they have run very smoothly indeed. So they have a lot of kind of expertise. What they haven't fully committed to is when they'll be opening broader and broader. So so that's the one issue. Certainly MSC are operating. They've got lots of learning, so they have lots of confidence they're going to open. A lot of it is going to hinge around Europe and Europe opening. So as you point out, you're selling out of Venice. So it's really uncertain around whether they're going to be, it is going to be allowing people in and out. Is the EU going to be allowing people in and out? One of the things to watch out for is, we heard and I was talking about earlier, is the EU have indicated that they have agreed in principle, or there's lots to be still argued about, the idea of some kind of digital vaccine passport for people to move around Europe and also for countries to come in. But that's not going to be ready. They're not going to agree that till summer. So I think we're seeing in Europe is they're saying, although Greece and Spain are pushing for them to open early because tourism is so important, it's uncertain whether it's going to be open. So I would say it's really has a big question mark around it. It's hard to say. July feels like the earliest, and it still looks challenging with people moving between countries. I'm guessing Venice, you may be doing that beautiful trip, which is going down to Croatia, Greek islands, and into Greece. But certainly Greece and Italy are open for cruising and pretty willing to open for cruising, although Greece has lots of restrictions. So that itinerary may run. I think it's very difficult. It's very difficult to say. Certainly, I have a Mediterranean cruise in July, not that particular one, which I don't think will run. If that helps. Like, I'm not at all optimistic. When I look at that itinerary, the number of countries are going to, like, I'm not optimistic, but I don't know any more any more than that. So Kevin is touching back on the Cunard. Cunard said they won't resume until guests can move freely. We have cruises Europe in July and September. The crew won't have the vaccine by July. Now, I guess what you're referring to is they're focusing on not having to run cruise line only excursions. I think you mean by that. So I haven't seen them say that specific thing around the moving. But of course, one of the critical things with the whole protocols that have come into place is one of the protocols is currently that you can't go off and self-explore yourself. So I think that's what they're referring to, is allowing people the freedom to go out. So a lot of that's going to hinge on whether the countries allow that to happen. So the reason that it's happening at the moment is ports don't want people coming off and traveling around. So of course, as people get more vaccines, as they feel more comfortable, whatever that ends up looking like, I think that's probably what they mean. So September feels much more optimistic. July, I think there's a lot of questions around whether Europe will open. Now, it sounds like you may be US based. I'm not sure if that's true. And a lot of that's going to hinge around when Europe opens for third countries, as they call it, like the UK, like the US, and so on. So huge, loads and loads of questions that we had. Thanks so much for all the questions. An hour's already gone by, and I've answered as many as I possibly can. What I will do is I will go back, have a look at the questions, and make sure I try and answer those next time. So thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate you giving up your time to come and join. I hope I've answered many of your questions. I have a video out which came out on Friday, This Changes Everything, which takes a look at some of the big updates, things that are happening within cruising. So if you want something else, if you haven't had enough of me for this 1 hour, then please go and watch that. So hope you have a good rest of the weekend. Thanks for joining me for this hour, and I keep watching videos, and I hope that I do get to see you here again next week for the live stream. Take care.